The one thing I didn't hear in there was AI, the application of AI to this space. Is that just too far off, or is it just it's just not really necessary in this space at this point in time? Where do you land on AI and diagnostics?
Well, I'm very biased. I did my PhD in AI back in the 1980s, so a very, very retro version of AI. It was called expert systems, and
Hmm.
um, it was super fun. I only know one programming language, which is Lisp, that I think has pretty much vanished from the face of the earth. Um, so I've always been interested in AI, and a friend and I a year ago started a company called Ryght, RYGHT. I spent a while a few years ago on the board of a clinical research organization, a sort of I think it was a 20,000 person clinical trial runner, and so got exposure to clinical trials. And I felt as the large learning models came online, they seemed a natural to build tools for the clinical trial business because it's an incredibly people intensive, expensive, and slow
Hmm.
business. And everything is challenging. In particular, identifying patients is challenging, but also keeping them engaged is challenging. And so that's been a really interesting ride. So it's a little out of the category. So it's healthcare, but it's certainly not directly tied to genome sequencing. Um, the area that I'm most fascinated about intellectually, where it is having an impact there, is the fact that it seems the most extraordinary thing to me that these large learning models, even though we think of them in general as they're called language models, but we think of it as human
Yeah.
language, that they're magically capable for reasons it seems we don't completely understand of reasoning with human language. They're really good at dealing with the languages of the proteome and the genome, and that you can
Hmm.
train them on these things and they will start to give you new ones. For example, there's basically an infinite number of proteins, as I understand it. The number of
Yeah.
variations on protein sequences is effectively infinite. And then there's folding and there's post-translational modifications. It's a vast space. And so the abilities of these instruments to, sorry, these models to generate new proteins, which in turn potentially drugs, is absolutely unbounded. And linking that back to instruments to me is interesting, and I'm really working hard on understanding this thesis. But why I think it's another amazing potential driver for the tools business is we know in human space that those models are incredibly difficult to train. A baby gets trained in just a few years, just crawling around the house, right? But we seem to have, for these foundational models, we have to seem to take all of human knowledge and pump it into the model like a giant fire hose, right? They're just, for whatever reason,
Yeah.
Jan LeCun makes a big deal out of this. For whatever reason, they're kind of really stupid when it comes to learning, and different, suggests that they're actually learning in a very different way to the fact that humans do. This is also true of these genomics and proteomics models. So it turned out to be pretty convenient that we had the internet and we had all this data and Wikipedia and everything else was already out there when we needed to start training large language models. We don't have that for genomics and proteomics. And so I think
Yeah.
it's a huge opportunity for building the training data sets. And that can be as rich as plugging it into EMRs. So you have the outcomes, right? LLMs eventually, they speak English, sorry, any language, French, really well. And so they can start to go through doctor's notes. They can recognize handwritings, right? So all of a sudden you both unlocking a lot of the phenotypical data that's in the EMRs with some flavors of LLMs, but also being able to link that to vast bodies of information that you need to be able to do training. And then on the back end, as the LLMs start to suggest new drug candidates, you've got to test them. I joined the board recently of a UK company called Sphere Fluidics, and Sphere encapsulates individual cells into tiny little bubbles and can run basically 40 million experiments a day on individual cells. And that's interesting when you're starting to get the output of some of these AI drug development companies. How do you test en masse, right? I was fascinated when I first got into life science to realize that most work was still done on 96 well plates with pipettes. And automation means a robot to do the pipetting. It's fascinating to me that it's, and now I understand better the reasons for it, but it feels weirdly baroque. And I think, and there's been a lot of experimentation with new models for how to do, much greater volumes. And sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. But I think those two things, I think developing tools to develop training sets and tools to do validation of candidates to match the likely incredible hunger and output of these large learning models, I think is a giant potential opportunity that's building up right now.